Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine this scenario. You've got a big presentation tomorrow. You've put in the hours, rehearsed until you're blue in the face, you know your stuff. Logically, rationally, you're prepared. But then, bam!
Right.
A wave of dread washes over you. Your palms get sweaty, your stomach twists, and suddenly you just know it's going to be a disaster.
Hmm.
That feeling feels so real, so overpowering, it convinces you that failure is inevitable regardless of all that preparation.
Or perhaps you felt that gut-wrenching pang of jealousy when your partner mentioned talking to a colleague. That feeling flares up intensely, and in that instant, it feels like undeniable proof that something suspicious is going on.
Even if there's nothing there.
Exactly, even though there's absolutely zero objective evidence of infidelity or deception. These powerful internal experiences, these intense feelings, they feel incredibly real, don't they? They feel like solid ground.
They absolutely do. And that's the heart of what we're diving into today, this potent mismatch between how something intensely feels to us and what is actually objectively true in reality. This is a core part of something called emotional reasoning. It's a fundamental human tendency, something, honestly, we all fall into sometimes.
It is indeed. And drawing from the stack of materials you shared with us, the articles, research excerpts, your own notes,
Yeah.
our mission in this deep dive is to really get to the bottom of this.
Okay.
We're going to define emotional reasoning clearly, explore why our feelings wield such power and can lead us astray. Look at how this shows up in countless everyday scenarios you'll likely recognize.
Yeah, the relatable stuff.
Exactly. Understand the significant impact it can have on our lives, and crucially, equip you with practical, actionable strategies from these sources to challenge it and navigate it more effectively.
Right. We'll delve into why our emotions feel so incredibly valid, almost like undeniable facts, and learn how to bring a bit more balance to the equation, integrating the valuable information our feelings provide with a clearer view of objective reality.
Yeah.
It's about becoming more aware of this common cognitive pitfall and learning how to respond differently to those powerful internal signals.
So let's start by laying the foundation. What exactly are we talking about when we use the term emotional reasoning?
Let's pin it down.
At its core, it's the cognitive distortion where you treat your feelings as if they are concrete proof of something's truth. Or, you allow your feelings alone to dictate your behavior, often setting aside any available objective evidence.
It's the internal shortcut that says, okay, I feel this, therefore this must be true.
Precisely. It's that leap from a subjective internal state to an objective conclusion about reality. Mistaking feelings for facts. It sounds simple, but because feelings are so intensely felt, this mistake can be incredibly convincing.
And the sources mention it goes by a couple of other names, right?
You might also encounter terms like ex consequentia reasoning or feeling-driven thinking.
Ex consequentia.
Yeah, it's Latin. Basically means from the consequence. The idea is the consequence of some event or thought is being used as the premise for a conclusion instead of objective evidence.
That really highlights the sort of backward logic inherent in it, and the material links this closely to automatic thinking.
It does. These are the rapid-fire thoughts that seem to just pop into our minds without conscious effort. Aaron Beck, pioneer of cognitive behavioral therapy, initially focused on these automatic negative thoughts as key drivers of distress.
Right.
The understanding has deepened since then. While these thoughts can be the content of emotional reasoning, like I feel anxious, leads to the thought I'm going to fail. The process of emotional reasoning itself, well, it's increasingly linked to emotional arousal, triggering specific brain responses.
So the feeling itself isn't just a thought, it's actually impacting how our brain processes information. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. When we experience intense emotions, particularly strong negative ones like fear or anxiety, areas of the brain responsible for complex logical reasoning and reality checking, primarily parts of the prefrontal cortex, can become inhibited. Meanwhile, more primitive areas involved in immediate emotional processing, like the amygdala within the limbic system, become highly active.
It's like the alarm system in our brain is blaring so loud, it's temporarily shutting down the analytical department.
That's a very good analogy.
Yeah.
This evolutionary fast-track system, as some sources describe it, evolved for rapid response to immediate threats than encountering a predator.
Right. Run first, ask questions later.
Exactly. You didn't have time to sit and rationally analyze the situation. You needed to react instantly based on the feeling of fear. Run now, think later.
Okay.
But in our complex modern world, those same systems can be triggered by non-life-threatening situations, like a presentation or a social interaction.
Okay.
When this happens, the intense feeling dominates, inhibiting the slower, more rational parts of the brain needed to step back, look at the evidence, and override the feeling-driven conclusion.
So the feeling of anxiety, for instance, doesn't just bring the thought, I'm going to fail. It actually makes it harder for my brain to access the information that would prove that thought wrong, like the hours I spent studying.
Precisely. You're relying on the feeling because the cognitive resources needed to check it against reality are temporarily less available. And this, as the sources confirm, places emotional reasoning squarely within the category of a cognitive distortion.
One of the unhelpful thinking styles.
Yes. Cognitive distortions are systematic errors or biases in how we process information about ourselves, others, and the world. They are problem-thinking patterns that lead to inaccurate or negatively skewed perceptions of reality.
And emotional reasoning is a classic one.
Absolutely. Because it bypasses objective reality in favor of subjective feeling, leading to incorrect conclusions and often amplifying distress.
Okay, so we've defined it mistaking feelings for facts and touched on the brain science behind why those feelings can feel so overpowering in the moment. But why do emotions in general hold such sway over us? Why are they so believable?
It's a deep question, and the sources delve into the inherent power of emotions. One key reason is their direct internal nature. We experience emotions subjectively from within our own bodies and minds.
Right, inside us.
This makes them feel intensely personal, valid, and undeniably real to the person experiencing them.
Because I feel this knot in my stomach, this trembling in my hands, it must mean something is wrong, something is dangerous. It feels like physical proof.
Exactly. That visceral felt experience gives emotions immense persuasive power. They don't just provide information. They seem to enhance the perceived credibility of other information and inferences you might make.
How so?
Well, if you feel fear, any ambiguous signal in your environment is more likely to be interpreted as a threat. And you feel more certain of that interpretation because you feel afraid.
It adds weight to whatever the feeling is pointing towards, and they also influence where our attention goes, right?
Absolutely. Emotions act like a spotlight, directing our attention towards things relevant to the emotion. Anxiety makes you hypervigilant for threats. Joy makes you notice opportunities for pleasure. Anger makes you focus on perceived injustices. This selective attention can reinforce the emotional reasoning loop. If I feel anxious, I'll scan for danger, find something ambiguous, interpret it negatively because I'm anxious, and that confirms the feeling.
It creates a feedback loop that validates the feeling, even if the initial trigger was minor or misinterpreted.
It really can.
Yeah.
And connecting back to the brain, there's a strong evolutionary argument for why we're wired this way, as suggested by people like Paul Gilbert. Relying on rapid, fast-track, effective responses was crucial for survival in dangerous environments.
React first, think later when safety is secured.
Precisely. The limbic system is evolutionarily older than the highly developed prefrontal cortex. Our capacity for complex, abstract reasoning is relatively new on the evolutionary timeline. So, when faced with situations our older brain systems interpret as urgent, those systems can quickly hijack the controls, overriding the slower, more deliberate process of weighing evidence and forming rational conclusions. This is that primitive brain's urgency mentioned in the sources, making those feeling-driven conclusions incredibly hard to immediately bring under rational control.
It makes sense from an ancient survival perspective, but less so when you're trying to navigate a performance review or, a disagreement with a friend.
Exactly. Objective, rational thinking often requires conscious effort and doesn't always come as naturally as that quick, feeling-based reaction. However, and this is a crucial point emphasized in the sources, none of this means that emotions are inherently bad or useless. Far from it.
Right, they're not just noise, they're signals.
Powerful signals. Happiness tells us something is rewarding and beneficial. Fear signals a potential threat to our safety or well-being. Sadness communicates loss or vulnerability. Anger often indicates a boundary has been violated or an injustice has occurred. Disgust signals something potentially toxic or contaminated, whether physically or socially.
And they don't just inform us, they direct our energy and attention too.
Yes, they focus us on relevant aspects of our environment, the source of potential pleasure, the potential danger, the loss that needs processing, the target of our frustration, the thing to avoid. And crucially, they motivate action. Happiness motivates approach and repetition. Fear motivates avoidance or escape. Sadness can motivate seeking comfort or support. Anger can motivate asserting boundaries or defending ourselves. Disgust motivates avoidance or expulsion. As one source beautifully puts it, they tell us what is important, and they guide people towards what they need to do and who they are.
So they are vital tools for survival, connection, and navigating life's basic needs.
Absolutely essential. The danger, and where emotional reasoning trips us up, lies in the crucial distinction. While emotions are intense experiences that provide information, they are not necessarily conclusions or facts about objective reality.
Ah, this is the core point, isn't it? My feeling of fear is real information. My brain has perceived something as a threat, but it doesn't automatically mean an actual objective threat is present.
Exactly. Think of Lisa Feldman Barrett's perspective, mentioned in the materials. She suggests that emotions aren't simply reactions to the world, but are constructed by the brain making guesses.
Pause.
Yes, guesses based on past experience and sensory input to quickly predict and create our experience of the world. The brain is constantly trying to anticipate needs and prepare the body to act. That feeling of fear is a prediction, a best guess based on past learning. The danger is imminent, and you should prepare to react.
But a guess, even a really strong guess.
No matter how compelling it feels, isn't the same as verified fact.
So the emotional truth, how it feels subjectively, internally, can be profoundly different from the perceptual or objective truth, what is demonstrably happening in the external world. Recognizing this gap is the first step.
That distinction is absolutely fundamental to understanding and managing emotional reasoning. It's not about ignoring or suppressing emotions, but about recognizing their nature as informative predictions or signals, not definitive conclusions about objective reality, and then integrating that information with rational analysis.
Okay, we've got a solid handle on what emotional reasoning is, why our feelings are so convincing, and the critical difference between feeling and fact. Now, let's bring this down to earth. How does this actually manifest in our everyday lives? The sources give us a wealth of relatable examples.
They do, and once you start looking, you see it everywhere. A huge domain is in how we perceive ourselves.
Oh, yeah. This is where it gets really personal for a lot of people.
Absolutely. The classic example is feeling fat and concluding, because I feel fat, I must be fat, even if your body mass index is perfectly healthy.
The feeling just bulldozes the facts.
The intense feeling overrides the objective measurement. Or feeling like a complete loser after a minor setback and deciding, well, I feel like a loser, so I guess I just am a loser. There's no point in trying.
That negative internal state becomes definitive proof of a deeply negative identity.
Or feeling worthless, insignificant, or like a failure, and using those intense feelings as evidence that you must be unlovable, that nothing in your life will ever improve, that your life is pointless. These are feelings driving catastrophic self-judgments.
It's like holding up your internal feeling state as if it were a mirror showing you the objective truth about yourself.
Precisely. Or feeling stupid and conclude you are stupid despite holding a challenging job or having academic qualifications.
Right, despite all the evidence to the contrary.
Feeling like you haven't achieved enough compared to others, and using that feeling of inadequacy as proof that you should have accomplished more by now.
These internal applications are incredibly common and often fuel things like low self-esteem or imposter syndrome. And it also shows up massively in relationships.
Oh, definitely. It's a frequent source of conflict and misunderstanding. Feeling a strong pang of jealousy when your partner talks to someone else, and concluding, I feel jealous, so they must be doing something suspicious or unfaithful, even if there's a history of trustworthiness and no actual evidence.
The feeling creates the narrative, and you believe the narrative without checking the facts.
Exactly. Or feeling lonely and deciding, I feel lonely, so I must be unlovable and no one cares about me, which then prevents you from reaching out to the very friends and family who do care.
Yeah, that self-isolation cycle. There was that specific example in the sources about having a vivid dream someone cheated.
Ah, yes.
And then not trusting what they tell you in real life. The feeling generated by the dream is treated as if it were evidence from waking reality.
That's a powerful illustration of how the subjective internal experience, the feeling from the dream, is mistaken for objective fact. Or feeling angry at someone and concluding, I feel this angry, so they must have done something genuinely wrong and deserve my anger, without considering their perspective or the actual situation.
Right, just assuming your anger is justified because it's strong.
Feeling like your friend or partner is mad at you just because they seem quiet, and concluding they feel distant, so they must be angry with me, when they might simply be tired or preoccupied.
And it extends to predicting the future, especially with anxiety, as we mentioned earlier.
A classic, anxious application, feeling intensely anxious about an upcoming test, presentation, job interview, a trip, even just driving in traffic and concluding, because I feel this level of dread, something absolutely terrible will happen.
The physical sensations of anxiety in traffic, the racing heart, the tightness become proof that the road is dangerous, rather than just a stress response to congestion or maybe a close call you had before.
Exactly. Or having a vague bad feeling about going to a party or moving to a new city and deciding, I have this bad feeling, so something bad will happen if I go move. Treating that feeling as a crystal ball projecting doom.
It influences decision-making, too, beyond just predicting negative outcomes.
Yes. Making significant decisions based purely on a gut feeling, without gathering or analyzing relevant information.
Like buying a house.
Or even deciding on a financial product, like a loan, purely because this one feels right, instead of comparing interest rates, terms, and fees. Or letting the feeling of inadequacy dictate your actions. I feel like a failure, so I won't even try to apply for that promotion or start that project, using the feeling as an excuse to avoid taking a potentially positive step.
So the feeling becomes both the premise and the conclusion, shutting down any rational exploration of options.
Correct. Workplace examples abound as well. Feeling scared about a complex project and concluding it will inevitably fail. Feeling overlooked or unappreciated and deciding, my manager must dislike me, without any specific feedback or performance issues indicating that.
Just a vibe.
Just a vibe, exactly. Feeling suspicious about a colleague and concluding, I have a bad feeling about them, they must be hiding something or undermining me.
And sometimes it's used to justify emotional reactions or behaviors towards others.
Like feeling intensely angry at someone and concluding, I feel this angry, therefore my anger is justified and they deserve whatever reaction I give them, bypassing any need for accountability or objective assessment of the situation. These examples underscore just how pervasive and subtle emotional reasoning can be, weaving itself into our daily thoughts and interpretations.
It's clear it's incredibly common. Given that, what's the real impact? Why does learning to manage this matter so much for our well-being and how we navigate life?
The impact is significant and far-reaching. One of the primary consequences is a profoundly distorted perception of reality. When you rely solely on how you feel, you start interpreting ambiguous situations, interactions, and your own experiences through a filter that is often negatively skewed.
Right.
Seeing threats or problems where none objectively exist.
So the feeling isn't just in you, it colors everything you see outside of you.
Exactly. That distorted lens then amplifies emotional distress. Emotional reasoning is a major driver in intensifying and maintaining negative emotions like anxiety, depression, and anger, creating vicious cycles.
Can you give an example of that cycle?
Sure. For someone with anxiety, the pattern can be a scary thought or feeling arises, e.g., I feel anxious driving on the highway. You engage in emotional reasoning, I feel this anxious, so this must be dangerous. You respond with avoidance or escape, taking a longer, less direct route or avoiding highways altogether.
Which feels better short-term.
Exactly. Which might provide temporary relief, but ultimately reinforces the belief that the initial feeling was accurate and that the situation was indeed dangerous. This strengthens the anxiety and leads to greater avoidance over time.
The temporary relief from avoidance acts as a false confirmation of the feeling's validity.
Precisely. For individuals struggling with depression, emotional reasoning can mean becoming trapped in a belief that their pervasive negative feelings, sadness, hopelessness, lethargy, worthlessness, are an accurate, objective reflection of their life's reality.
So, I feel hopeless, therefore my life is hopeless.
Exactly. And that conclusion reinforces the feeling, deepening the depressive cycle.
It also takes a heavy toll on our relationships, I imagine.
Significant strain. Relying on emotional reasoning leads to misunderstandings, erodes trust. Think about constantly suspecting your partner because you feel jealous. It can alienate others if you react based on assuming they are mad at you, and often results in blaming loved ones for your internal state. You make me feel X, so it's your fault. These dynamics are built on feeling-driven assumptions, not factual interactions.
And it's a huge engine for self-sabotage.
Absolutely. It fuels self-defeating behaviors. Procrastination. I feel overwhelmed by this task, so it must be too difficult, leading you not to start.
Yeah, I know that one.
Damaging relationships by implicitly or explicitly acting out mistrust based on feeling, potentially pushing the other person away, avoiding potentially positive experiences like canceling plans or a trip because of a bad feeling that you interpret as a definite sign of impending disaster.
You act on the distorted feeling, and the outcome of that action then seems to validate the initial feeling, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's a common pattern. People heavily influenced by emotional reasoning can also develop significant cognitive blind spots. They may struggle with reality checking their assumptions,
Yep.
with psychologically distancing themselves from intense emotions, which is called diffusion, with generating and considering alternative explanations for events, with making deliberate decisions based on a balanced view of facts and values, and with acting intentionally rather than just impulsively reacting to a feeling.
It seems like it impairs the very skills needed to navigate life effectively. Are there physical consequences too? You mentioned stress.
Yes, the sources mention that the chronic stress generated by living under the sway of intense, unchecked emotional reasoning can impact physical health. This can lead to somatization, where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms.
Like headaches or stomach problems?
Could be, yeah. And the research linking social pain, like feeling excluded or having conflict, to the activation of the same brain regions as physical pain, well, that highlights how our emotional interpretations can translate directly into felt bodily sensations, amplifying stress and its physical effects.
So, internal emotional turbulence driven by distortions can literally make you feel physically unwell over time.
It can become a deeply intertwined cycle of mental and physical distress. Furthermore, it hinders good judgment. Basing decisions and reactions on amplified emotions rather than a clear-eyed assessment of reality prevents objective and constructive problem-solving.
Your feeling-driven reactions often just make things worse.
Exactly. They escalate issues instead of helping to resolve them.
And it makes us more susceptible to confirmation bias, you said.
Definitely. If you feel certain about something based on emotion, you're much more likely to selectively seek out and pay attention to information that confirms that feeling, while ignoring or dismissing evidence that contradicts it.
So you find proof for your feeling.
Right. This can lead to rejecting factual information, solidifying inaccurate beliefs, and becoming more rigid or extreme in your views, making you blind to nuance and alternative perspectives.
Wow. So the impact is pervasive, affecting our self-perception, relationships, decision-making, physical health, and our ability to think clearly. It's clearly not just a minor quirk.
It's a significant barrier to mental well-being and effective functioning in the world. That's why learning to identify and challenge it is so powerful.
Okay, the why is starkly clear. So what can we do? How do we untangle ourselves from this powerful distortion?
The good news is that there are well-established practical strategies drawn from therapeutic approaches like CBT and DBT that are effective in countering emotional reasoning.
Okay, good.
Tools. Yes. The crucial point is that the goal isn't to eliminate emotions. That's impossible and undesirable, as we discussed. Emotions provide vital information. The aim is to achieve a healthy balance, integrating the information from our feelings with rational thought and objective reality.
So awareness and choice.
It's about building awareness of the distortion when it's happening and learning to choose a different response.
It sounds like a process of developing new skills rather than just wishing the feelings away.
Absolutely. It requires practice and patience. The most fundamental principle, repeated across all the sources, is the mantra: feelings are not facts.
Say it again.
Feelings are not facts. Just because you feel it intensely, it doesn't mean it's true. This simple reminder, internalizing it, is the bedrock of challenging emotional reasoning.
It's like the catch it, check it, change it idea from basic CBT.
That framework captures the core process. You learn to catch the automatic thought driven by emotional reasoning. You check it against objective reality and alternative perspectives. And if it's inaccurate or unhelpful, you work to change the thought or your behavioral response to it.
Okay, let's dig into the practical techniques you mentioned based on the sources. What's the first step in applying these?
Building mindful awareness of your internal experience. This is about learning to observe your thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations objectively, without automatically fusing with them or assigning immediate meaning.
Just notice it.
It's noticing what's happening inside as just events, separate from the story your mind might be telling about them.
Can you walk through that distinction with an example, like the driving one?
Certainly. Instead of getting in your car and thinking, I feel really anxious right now about driving on the highway, something bad is definitely going to happen.
Right.
That's emotional reasoning, fusing feeling with predicted fact. Mindful awareness is practicing noticing something like, I'm aware I'm feeling a tightness in my chest. I'm noticing my heart is beating faster, and I'm having the thought, something bad could happen on this highway. You're observing the component, the sensation, the feeling label, the thought as distinct events. Rather than accepting the thought as a fused truth, dictated by the feeling.
You're creating a little space between yourself and the internal experience, like stepping back.
Exactly. And that leads directly to the second technique, practicing diffusion. This is about getting distance from your thoughts and emotions, seeing them as mental events passing through, not necessarily truths you have to believe or act upon.
How does one practice diffusion in the moment? It sounds a bit abstract.
One simple way is through language. Instead of saying or thinking, I am a failure, you could practice saying internally, I'm aware I'm having the thought that I'm a failure, or I'm noticing the feeling of failure.
Ah, changing the wording.
Yeah. Another technique is to imagine your thoughts are like leaves floating down a stream or cars passing by. You see them, but you don't have to jump on every leaf or get into every car, using the cheating dream example again.
Right.
Instead of automatically mistrusting your partner because you had a dream and feel unsettled, you could practice, I'm noticing I'm having thoughts stemming from that dream, or I'm aware of the feeling of unease after that dream.
It's changing the phrasing to emphasize that the thought is just a thought, the feeling is just a feeling, not necessarily reality.
Yes, it's a metacognitive skill, thinking about your thinking, also called decentering, viewing thoughts as cognitive events rather than accurate reflections of reality. It weakens the automatic link between the thought feeling and the conclusion.
And relatedly, just practicing not engaging with every single thought or feeling that pops up, just letting it be there.
Absolutely. You don't have to latch on to, analyze, or respond to every internal experience. Especially if you're prone to overthinking, this is a crucial skill. Remind yourself repeatedly, thoughts are thoughts, feelings are not facts. You can acknowledge the presence of the thought or feeling without getting pulled into its narrative or accepting it as truth.
So the feeling of inadequacy is present, but you don't have to accept it as a fact about your capability.
Exactly. It gives you a choice. The feeling happens, but your response to it is where you have agency.
Which brings us to the fourth strategy. Aligning your behaviors with what's truly important to you, your values or goals, rather than just automatically acting on an emotion.
This is strongly emphasized in DBT, sometimes called opposite action.
Opposite action, acting contrary to the emotional impulse.
Precisely. If you feel intense anxiety
Yeah.
and emotional reasoning tells you the situation is dangerous, the impulse might be to avoid. Opposite action means choosing to approach the situation, perhaps in a small, manageable way, because facing challenges aligns with a value like growth or courage, even though you feel afraid.
Okay, so leaning into the discomfort for a purpose.
Exactly. Using the cheating dream example again, you might still feel unsettled, but your value might be trust and open communication in your relationship. So you choose to behave in a trusting manner towards your partner, perhaps discussing the feeling the dream generated with them, rather than acting on the unfounded suspicion driven by emotional reasoning.
You can feel one way and intentionally act another way.
Absolutely. And the idea is that acting contrary to the emotion's usual impulse can actually weaken the intensity of that emotion over time.
Oh, interesting. So it can feed back and lessen the feeling?
It often does. The fifth technique is about grounding yourself in objective reality, sticking with the data and actively testing your feeling-driven assumptions. This is where you gather evidence.
Fact-checking your feelings.
Essentially, yes. One technique the sources mention is creating two columns. What I feel is true and what I know is true. Facts, evidence.
Okay, like a balance sheet.
Sort of. For example, if you feel like a loser after a difficult meeting, column 1, I feel like a loser, so I must be incompetent. Column 2, facts. I completed the project on time last week. My last performance review was positive. My colleague asked me for advice today. The meeting was difficult for everyone, not just me.
Looking at the evidence helps you see the gap between feeling and fact.
Definitely. Asking challenging questions helps here too.
Such as?
Crucially, questions like, what objective evidence actually supports this feeling-based judgment? What evidence contradicts it? What else could this situation mean? If I took off my emotional reasoning glasses, how might someone who felt calm or confident view this? You're actively searching for a more balanced perspective grounded in reality.
Right. And behavioral experiments. Testing things out.
Exactly. That's part of this consciously testing your assumption and observing what actually happens. If you feel certain your project pitch will fail because you feel scared, a behavioral experiment might be giving a mini pitch to a trusted colleague first and seeing their reaction. You're gathering data rather than just accepting the feeling as prophecy.
Okay. The sixth technique is cognitive restructuring, often using thought records. This sounds more formal.
It is a more structured way to challenge and change unhelpful thought patterns, including emotional reasoning. You typically record the situation that triggered the feeling, the automatic thought, which often contains the emotional reasoning, the feeling itself, and then you systematically evaluate the thought.
How do you evaluate it?
You list evidence for the thought and, importantly, evidence against it. You consider alternative, more balanced explanations for the situation. Finally, you formulate a more accurate and balanced thought based on the evidence.
So, walking through the process in a structured way, perhaps even on paper, helps you bypass the emotional brain's inhibition we talked about earlier.
It engages the rational part of your brain systematically, using the feeling stupid example. Situation, made a mistake on a report. Automatic thought, I feel stupid, so I must be incompetent. Feeling shame, frustration. Evidence for, I made the mistake. Evidence against, I've successfully completed many reports. My boss usually praises my work. Everyone makes mistakes. The mistake was minor.
Okay.
Alternative thoughts, it was a simple error that I can fix. I'm still learning. Making mistakes is part of the process. Balanced thought, I made a mistake on the report, but that doesn't mean I'm incompetent. I can learn from this and fix it.
That process seems incredibly helpful for dissecting the feeling-driven conclusion and building a more realistic one.
It really is. The seventh strategy focuses on shifting your emotional state itself. Since intense emotional arousal inhibits logical thinking, reducing the intensity of the emotion can make it easier to engage your rational brain and challenge the emotional reasoning.
So, calming down first before trying to reason it out.
Exactly. Techniques like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, meditation, gentle physical activity like walking, or even simple grounding techniques like the 5-4-3-2-1 method.
Naming things you see, feel, hear.
Yes, naming 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste can help regulate the nervous system. One source even mentioned hugging a pillow firmly as a physical grounding technique.
Huh, interesting.
Once the intense emotional wave has subsided, revisit the situation and your initial interpretation. You'll likely find it easier to see alternative perspectives and apply more rational thinking.
Grounding specifically helps by bringing you back to the present moment sensory reality, which is a powerful counterpoint to being lost in feeling-driven thoughts about potential past failures or future disasters.
It anchors you away from the abstract, often negative narrative fueled by the emotion. The 8th technique is retrospective mismatch.
Retrospective mismatch.
This involves looking back at past instances where you engaged in emotional reasoning and comparing your feeling-based predictions to what actually transpired.
Like remembering all the times you felt absolutely certain something terrible would happen, and it didn't.
Precisely. Maybe you felt convinced you'd fail a test because you were anxious, but you passed. Maybe you felt your partner was cheating because you felt jealous, but there was no evidence. Reflecting on these mismatches provides concrete historical evidence that your feelings, while real, have not always been accurate predictors of objective reality.
Ah, okay.
This helps weaken the automatic belief that if I feel it, it must be true.
It builds a personal database of evidence against the distortion, like your own internal fact checker.
Exactly. 9th, challenge your underlying beliefs. Emotional reasoning often stems from deeper core beliefs about yourself or the world. Assumptions like, my feelings are always an accurate reflection of reality. I should always trust my gut feeling implicitly, or if I feel bad, it means something is wrong with me.
The rules you live by, unconsciously sometimes.
Exactly. Identify these deeper assumptions and question their accuracy and helpfulness.
So it's not just challenging the surface thought, but the root system, getting a bit deeper.
Yes. Explore healthier alternative beliefs, such as feelings are important information, but they aren't the whole story, or gut reactions can be useful, but they need to be checked against facts, or feeling bad is a normal human experience, it doesn't define my worth. You can use thought records or behavioral experiments to test these core beliefs too.
10th, seek outside perspective. This seems crucial.
It really is. When you're trapped in emotional reasoning, your view is naturally skewed. Talking to a trusted friend, family member, mentor, or professional can provide an objective viewpoint you're currently missing.
Someone who isn't in the emotional soup with you.
Exactly. Someone who isn't caught in the same intense emotional state can often see the facts more clearly or offer alternative interpretations that simply aren't accessible to you in that moment. Their perspective can act as a reality check.
And finally, 11th, make self-reflection and awareness an ongoing practice. Back to awareness.
This is the foundation upon which all the other techniques are built. Regularly monitoring your emotions and thoughts, perhaps through daily check-ins, journaling, or simply pausing periodically throughout the day, helps you become more adept at noticing when emotional reasoning is happening in the first place.
catching it earlier.
Yes. Journaling in particular was highlighted in the sources as a powerful tool for tracking the pattern. What was the situation? What was the automatic thought fueled by feeling? What was the feeling? And what did I do? Noticing these patterns makes it easier to catch the distortions sooner in the future.
This is how you build the muscle of awareness over time.
Precisely. And it's vital to reiterate that if emotional reasoning is a persistent problem for you, causing significant distress, impacting your relationships, or interfering with your daily life, seeking professional support is incredibly valuable.
Don't struggle alone.
Absolutely. Therapists, especially those trained in CBT or DBT, are skilled at helping you identify your specific patterns of emotional reasoning, guiding you through these techniques in a tailored way, and providing support as you challenge these deeply ingrained habits.
They can offer that objective guidance and structure. The sources mention that finding a professional can be done through referrals, online directories, or contacting local mental health organizations.
Taking that step is a sign of strength and a proactive way to get expert support in navigating these challenges.
So that's a robust toolkit offering multiple avenues to start challenging emotional reasoning. And as we've discussed, this isn't something that only affects people with clinical diagnoses. It's a common human tendency.
That's a key nuance from the sources. While emotional reasoning can be amplified in conditions like anxiety disorders, depression, or personality disorders, leading to more intense distress, the distortion itself affects virtually everyone to some degree. It's part of the human cognitive architecture, a byproduct of how our brains process information and emotion.
You mentioned earlier the distinction between emotional truth and objective truth. And one perspective in the sources was that dismissing emotional truth entirely can be naive. Could we touch on that a bit more? Because that sounds potentially confusing.
It's an interesting point that adds complexity. The argument presented is that while emotional reasoning, mistaking feeling as objective fact, is problematic, emotions do convey a form of subjective truth that can be valid information in certain contexts.
Okay, like when?
The example given was buying a car. Objectively, car A might have better fuel economy and a lower price, but car B might feel right. It makes you feel confident, successful, or simply brings you joy when you drive it.
So in that scenario, the feeling isn't being used as proof that car B is objectively superior in fuel economy.
Right.
It's being used as valid information about your subjective preference, values like wanting to feel a certain way, or how you perceive yourself, or how you want others to perceive you.
Exactly. The feeling in this case isn't a distortion of objective reality, the car's specs. It's information about your internal state, values, and subjective experience, which are legitimate inputs for a decision that involves personal preference, not just pure objective function.
So the naivety comes from ignoring that subjective data completely.
That's the idea presented. Dismissing that subjective emotional information entirely could be seen as naive because it's part of what makes us human and influences choices where objective factors aren't the only criteria.
That makes sense. It's about context. Using feeling as fact about the external world is the distortion. Using feeling as valid information about your internal world or subjective preferences is something different.
Precisely. There was also an interesting point raised in a Reddit comment mentioned in the source material about the role of emotions in relationships.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, the idea that relating to others' feelings, even if those feelings might be based on their own emotional reasoning, can be important for connection.
So even if I think my friend's feeling, I feel like my boss hates me, is based on emotional reasoning, connecting with the feeling of being disliked or insecure is more important for maintaining the friendship than immediately pointing out their cognitive distortion, like not jumping straight to, that's just emotional reasoning.
That's the perspective presented. It highlights that in interpersonal dynamics, validating someone's subjective emotional experience, saying something like, "It sounds really tough feeling that way about your boss," is often crucial for empathy and connection.
Gotcha.
And that's distinct from validating the objective truth of the feeling's basis, like saying, yes, your boss definitely hates you. It underscores that balancing rationality with emotional connection is a necessary skill in relationships.
And the sources included some perspectives on CBT itself, acknowledging potential limitations or controversies. We should touch on those for balance.
They did, presenting some counterarguments to purely relying on CBT. These included the points that CBT techniques primarily focus on changing current or future thinking patterns, rather than necessarily addressing the underlying root causes of distress, like past trauma or developmental issues.
Okay.
Also, that the emphasis on individual thoughts and behaviors can sometimes place too much responsibility solely on the individual while potentially overlooking significant external factors, social, economic, systemic, that are genuinely contributing to their situation.
Right. It's not always just your thinking.
And finally, that successfully applying these techniques requires significant commitment, effort, and can be emotionally demanding work over time.
So while these strategies are powerful tools supported by research, they aren't necessarily a universal panacea, and applying them comes with its own challenges and considerations. It's good to keep that context.
It's important to acknowledge these viewpoints from the material to provide a balanced picture. Ultimately, the consistent thread woven through the sources is the value of cultivating awareness and striving for that balance between our emotional experience and our rational capacity, integrating them, rather than allowing one to dominate and distort the other.
This deep dive has really given us a comprehensive look at emotional reasoning from its roots in our brain's ancient wiring to how it shows up in frustrating everyday examples, the real impact it has, and importantly, a powerful toolkit of strategies drawn from the materials you shared.
Becoming aware of this tendency, practicing techniques like diffusion, reality checking, and challenging underlying beliefs, it is indeed a practice. It's not about achieving overnight perfection, but about consistently showing up, noticing, and applying these skills.
Takes time.
It takes time and effort, but the potential payoff in terms of clearer thinking, reduced distress, and more effective navigation of life is immense.
So hopefully you now have a solid foundation from these sources to recognize emotional reasoning and start building those new habits.
As we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to maybe sit with. Given that our brains evolved to prioritize rapid, feeling-based responses for survival, and yet our complex modern world demands nuanced, objective analysis for everything from personal relationships to global issues, what other ancient autopilot tendencies might be subtly influencing our decisions and perceptions in ways we haven't even considered yet? If feelings are often the brain's guesses based on past experience, what surprising or outdated lessons might those guesses be drawing from that are no longer serving us in the present?